Right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for taking part in the first ever live Zoom Q&A that we're hosting through Cheeky Little Careers. I hope you're all having a nice afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping, as I've already mentioned to some of you. If you, we are recording this and it will be posted on the Cheeky Little Careers website. So if you prefer not to be visible on the screen, then please feel free to turn your cameras off. Equally, if you could also switch your sound off to mute, that would be fantastic so that we don't get background noise. And if you do have any questions, and I encourage as many as possible because this is a Q&A, then feel free to send them over to me using the private chat function. So what I'll do is make sure that any questions aren't attributed to any individuals in case you don't necessarily want everyone to know what your healthy eating dilemma is. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our sort of speaker, who is also an associate for Cheeky Little Careers. She is Elle. So Elle, why don't you start by telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Hello. I'm usually quite good at talking about myself, but I don't know where to go with this one. My name's Elle. I've been working as a freelance nutritionist for the last 2 years. I am also about to qualify as a registered dietitian. And yeah, my interest has always been in kind of nutrition and particularly in sports. So I am planning to do my master's in that quite soon as well.
Okay, just one question on that point. I'm not going to really introduce myself because I think it'll just take way too long, and this isn't about me, this is very much about healthy eating. But one question I had, and I know this came up when we discussed the session, Elle, is the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist. And if anyone listening wants to go and sort of get some one-to-one support, you know, either locally or virtually, or what sort of things they should be looking out for, because when I see the word nutrition, I always think that's someone telling me that I should be eating superfoods, and I get slightly skeptical about how much help they can really offer.
Yeah. Okay, so because my background is in dietetics, I'll explain the role of a dietitian first. So dietitians are the only nutrition professionals that are protected by law. So that means anyone can call themselves a nutritionist without having a degree or any kind of qualifications. But in order to call yourself a dietitian, you must be registered with the government body. Basically, it's against the law to call yourself a dietitian if you don't have the qualifications. And in order to qualify, you must have a bachelor's or a master's degree in dietetics. So you can rest assured that if someone is calling themselves a registered dietitian, they have the qualifications. So a dietetics degree is usually a bit more in depth than a nutrition degree, even if it is at university level. And dietitians are hence qualified to provide kind of information for people who have medical conditions, and you'll typically see a dietitian working in a more clinical based environment like a hospital, whereas nutritionists tend to work more in public health or as freelancers. So whilst nutritionists and dietitians are both able to provide nutrition advice, only the dietitians are registered by law. So I would say that if you are going to see a dietitian, you can rest assured that they probably have the qualifications, but with a nutritionist, anyone can call themselves it. So they could have done a university degree or a 2-week nutrition online course.
Yeah. So why would someone see a nutritionist rather than a dietitian?
Dietitians and nutritionists can do both. If you're going to see a nutritionist, I personally believe it's probably because people don't know what dietitians are. So people hear the word dietitian and I don't think they related to diet. Whereas nutritionist sounds more like what you said, nutrition, and they're going to be telling you what to be eating. But technically, a dietitian is a little bit more qualified to give advice.
And I'm assuming that a dietitian would probably have more expertise supporting patients with health conditions like diabetes, Crohn's disease, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You'll normally see a dietitian probably in a hospital, or they are qualified to deal with people.
Got you. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Now let's move on to the theme for this Q&A, which is healthy eating habits during lockdown, because I've certainly been guilty of it. I think the problem I've encountered isn't so much sort of eating junk food, because I've always had a good stockpile of healthy food in the house. For me, it's all about the routine going completely out of the window. And I'm skipping meals because I'm working through lunch breaks, because I'm trying to juggle far too many things. And yeah, so what sort of problems have people mentioned to you in terms of concerns they've had about healthy eating?
I think people just eating out of boredom. You know, people aren't used to working from home and that discipline. And especially if you're sitting in the kitchen and you can just look at all the cupboards when you're, you know, in a thought. So, yeah, I have had a lot of clients particularly struggle at the beginning of lockdown. Not so much now, because we've been able to put some good habits in place. So things like skipping meals, probably not advised.
I'm definitely guilty of that one, yeah.
I definitely think you should be sticking to your usual work routine as best as you can. So if you have your breakfast usually at 7 a.m. before you leave the house, then try your best to stick to that and those times.
Yeah.
And make sure you are taking a break for lunch.
Okay.
Having a lunch.
And I suppose there's been quite a lot of confusing information in the media, hasn't there? And about sort of foods that you should be eating to boost your immune system, foods that could cure you of COVID-19. And then there's been a lot of press sort of coverage on vitamin D. And I've started taking it, actually. Should I have done that or not?
Are you a bit of a sheep following the media then?
Absolutely.
Actually, the NHS has advised that you should consider taking a vitamin D supplement during the next few months. So typically all adults and children are advised to take a vitamin D supplement from September to March. So that would be during the kind of wintry and autumn months when we won't get as much sunshine. Elderly people and babies under 1 should usually take it year round. But in the beginning of lockdown, it was recommended that we continue to take a vitamin D supplement containing about 10 micrograms of vitamin D. And that's because obviously at the beginning of lockdown, the restrictions were so strict that, you know, you were only allowed out of the house once a day. The weather wasn't as amazing as it has been, although this week has gone a bit backwards, hasn't it? But I would probably say that at the moment, considering the good weather we have been having and that the restrictions aren't as strict anymore, and you can get out for a walk more than once a day and you can be out in the sun, if you are able to be out in the sun, you probably don't need the vitamin D supplements. But definitely if you're in the high risk category for the coronavirus and you're staying inside a little bit more, you should probably maybe consider taking one.
And would that actually be a tablet like I'm taking, or is it just eating foods that are higher in vitamin D? And if so, or both, what foods would you recommend for high vitamin D?
So the sun is actually where we get most of our vitamin D, and there are 2 types of vitamin D, and the one that we get through the sun, basically when it hits our skin, we can make it in our body, because vitamin D is actually a hormone. In terms of eating, you can eat a lot of foods that are rich in vitamin D, but you probably won't get enough. It is the sunshine that we need to kind of focus on. So that's why supplementation is quite important, because it can make up for that. In terms of foods high in vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. So it's going to be in fattier foods. So it's going to be in the yolk of your egg, in oily fish, and there are some like dairy products that would be fortified with it.
And what about people who are vegetarian?
I would definitely recommend taking a vitamin D supplement then. If you don't eat fish or you don't eat eggs, there is small amounts of vitamin D in some vegetables. As I said, it's a fat soluble vitamin, so not significant amounts.
So anyone who's vegetarian listening in this climate, it's probably worth getting some vitamin D tablets. And do you think you should take a vitamin D tablet on its own, or is there enough vitamin D in multivitamin tablets?
It will definitely depend on the multivitamins. So different brands have different amounts. And usually you'll find vitamin D as a supplement alongside calcium. And that's because the two of them are actually really important for the absorption of each other.
Okay. And let's move on to, because you mentioned sort of the word fat, and it's an area that I sometimes, or before we do that, I have a question. Is there a difference between vitamin D tablets offered, such as strengths, or that's a very good question. Thank you for that one. Because I've just ordered a batch from my supermarket delivery. So whatever they had.
Okay.
Will all supermarket brands have the same dosage, or?
They should all have the same dosage. So you should be aiming for 10 micrograms of vitamin D in the supplement, and that could be over 2 tablets or 3 tablets. There's really no kind of, the only supplement I would ever say to go for the most expensive one would be probiotics. So in terms of like your vitamins, you know, your Tesco one is just as good as the one you'll get in your pharmacy. Just make sure that it has the same dosage, which is 10 micrograms.
10 micrograms, okay. Just another question, once we're talking about vitamins. This one is there a multivitamin you would recommend? And what about the soluble types? Are they better or worse?
So I actually can't recommend a specific type of supplement. The NHS doesn't let dietitians do that. So it will come down to, what I will say is, think of, you know, is the brand reputable? And do they have other products in their range? And don't be buying it if it's got random health claims. You know, look at the back, see what vitamins are listed, what the percentage nutrient value is. So it will always say, you know, 121% of your recommended nutrient intake for that day. To check the percentages to see if it's sufficient enough. The only vitamin you can really overdose on is vitamin A, and that's when it comes from animal sources. And most multivitamins will be vegetarian, so you shouldn't be too concerned about that.
Oh, that's useful to know. I didn't realise that vitamin tablets are vegetarian. Okay, so yeah, just changing the subject on to fats and cholesterol, just because you mentioned about vitamin D being a soluble fat. Yeah. And it ties in with healthy snacks, I guess, because I try to have healthy snacks in the house, partly because I'm on a really random diet, which stops me from eating things like chocolate. And my go-to sort of snack is either a cereal bar or nuts. Okay, can nuts make you gain weight? Are they quite fatty in terms of levels of calories?
So I will always say that no single food or food group will cause you to gain weight. Excess weight is accumulated when you consistently eat more calories than your body requires. So no one food is going to cause you to gain weight when it's eaten in moderation. Nuts are high in unsaturated fat, which is really good for our heart health. And, you know, we would encourage eating nuts, like probably 3 portions a week is sufficient for heart health. But because they are quite fat dense, I think I was explaining to you the other day that fat is the most calorific nutrient. So carbohydrates and protein per gram provide 4 calories. And for every gram of fat, there are 9 calories. So that's double and a bit more. So anything high in fat is going to be high in calories. Even though we're saying it's healthy fats, if you are, you know, a bit concerned about gaining weight or you are trying to lose weight, I would say that you should definitely try and portion control nuts, which is quite difficult to do because, you know, a handful of nuts is about 160 calories, and you wouldn't think that in eating a small handful of nuts.
Wow, no, I thought that's almost the same as a digestive biscuit.
Yeah, well, two biscuits. So, 30 grams of nuts is kind of the recommended portion size, and that's about 160 calories. And unfortunately, it's not a whole lot.
So how many is that? Can you count them? Because I'm really bad with weights and measurements. If you were to show me how many that would be.
About 15 cashews.
50, wow, okay.
Yeah, I could be wrong on that because usually I would weigh them, but yeah, it's very, and I don't mean like a handful like that.
Yeah. And then what about the different nuts that do different things? Because you always hear stories, don't you, about some nuts being good for you, high in vitamin E, which is good for your skin, and then others will help you boost your energy levels, etc. If you had to pick a nut to sort of prioritize in your diet, which one would you go for?
Ultimately, all nuts will provide a certain amount of vitamin E. Cashews and almonds are quite rich in calcium, plant-based calcium. And so are things like sesame seeds and tahini. 2 Brazil nuts will provide your full nutrient recommended intake of selenium, which is really good for your hair and your skin and your nails. But I would definitely say, just which nut do you prefer? And
go by taste. Okay, that's useful to know, because I have to say there are some that I prefer more than others. Okay.
I'm addicted to cashews.
Okay. Let's stick to snacks for the time being. What tips do you have to stop us from raiding the cupboard, other than not having food in the house in the first place? And I know that some of us are trying to limit trips to the supermarket, others are self-isolating and therefore are having to make do with what they've got in the cupboards already. Others, certain things are just not as readily available, even as the lockdown measures ease. So what tips do you have for sort of healthy sort of snacking habits?
So just healthy snack ideas, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with this is that I read somewhere ages ago that you're much better off having lots of small snacks, so grazing, rather than having big meals that then make you feel a bit lethargic. So yeah, so it's trying to break that cycle, I guess, of dipping into the biscuit tin at certain times of the day. How can you? Because I think that I'm well aware of what I should be eating a lot of the times, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to do it or can do it, and I need to train my brain.
Yeah. So I think, as you said, having healthy snacks available is obviously going to be kind of a no-brainer, and trying not to be buying the stuff that you shouldn't be snacking on. But I would also kind of emphasize making sure you are having, your main meals, so you're not, letting yourself starve and then ending up binging on loads of little snacks in the afternoon, because those calories will add up. So snacking is by no means a bad thing to do, but I would advise things like nuts. I would advise portion controlling them in advance. So maybe putting them in a little weighing them out and putting them in a little Ziploc bag. So when you go to have a snack, you can just grab what's already pre-portioned, and you're not overeating on them.
Oh, good idea, yeah.
I would do the same with dried fruit. So dried fruit is actually, a lot of people think it's, as healthy as normal fruit, but it's higher in sugar and higher in calories, and you can have a lot less than, in comparison to a fresh portion of fruit for the same calories. So again, with dried fruit, if it's something you like to snack on, pre-portion that. Having things cut up like fruit in the fridge, or in the vegetables cut up as well, and some dips like hummus or peanut butter, again pre-portioned, because they can be quite high in calories.
Yeah, I find that the worst for me is trying to sort of, rather than listening to my body, and this is also tied in very nicely with managing your sort of schedule and time management. What I will do is, I'm too strict about what time my snack is going to be. So I might say, right, I'm going to have a snack at 11 o'clock, and that's just non-negotiable. So what will happen is I might feel peckish at 10:30, but rather than just go and pick something that will just take those hunger pangs away, I wait until 11 o'clock, which is my scheduled break. And then I will be starving, which means whereas at 10:30 I would have got away with 1 biscuit, I now end up grabbing 3. Do you think that's is that advice you would sort of condone, trying to sort of listen to your body rather than stick to rigid times?
I would always say listen to your body. Even when I have clients who are on a meal plan, if you're hungry, you're hungry. Have something to eat, choose something sensibly. And I think the key to it all is being mindful of what you're eating, being aware of what you're eating, and actually saying, right, has that satisfied me? Am I full, or am I still hungry? Because a lot of us are always distracted when we're eating, and unaware of how much we've eaten. an example is kind of when you're cooking dinner, you might have like hummus on the side and some like fried vitas or something while you're cooking dinner, and because you're distracted, you're completely unaware that you've eaten that. And whilst that might have filled you as a snack earlier on in the day, it's now become, you know, part of your big dinner meal, and we're just not aware of the calories that we're consuming. So I would say the key to it all is just to eat mindfully. So if you are hungry, have something to eat. And if you still think, oh, I'm hungry, but you couldn't possibly be hungry because you've just eaten, have a drink, you know, try and distract yourself. It could be boredom. But if it's not, and it is genuine hunger, eat.
Just whilst we're still on the subject of snacking and sort of portion control and being mindful, another question I had, and this is connected to lockdown, is that because although we get a weekly food delivery, I'm putting my shopping in a decontamination zone. That includes fruit. And I have to say that I'm ever so slightly paranoid about eating fruit, thinking it's contaminated. And I've gone as far as washing my oranges with washing up liquid. Okay, so I know it's crazy, but what I've done to sort of mitigate against that, I've looked for substitutes. So you mentioned dry fruit. So what I've done is supplemented my fresh fruit intake, which has gone down because I'm paranoid about touching raw fruit and veg, and instead grabbing a handful of dry mango pieces. Is that a really bad idea? Does dry fruit work as a decent substitute for the real fresh stuff?
It's not a really bad idea. Something to be aware of though, if it's mango, you know, you could eat a full mango, be quite full, it's X amount of calories, and then when you have dried mango, it's, you know, half the size, maybe even a quarter the size of the mango. So you end up eating more of the dried fruit to try and get, you know, the same equivalent, and that ends up being higher in sugar, like higher amounts of sugar consumed and higher amounts of calories consumed. So it's not an issue unless you are kind of concerned about your sugar intake and your calorie intake.
Okay, so, but would a portion of dry fruit count as your 5 a day though?
It does, yes.
Okay, but be mindful of the fact that it has more sugar, so have smaller portions.
Yeah.
Okay. And whilst we're in the paranoia of handling raw fruit and veg and whether I should be dipping into a punnet of strawberries, because obviously you can't, because with veg it's a little bit easier because you can cook them. Okay.
Yeah.
But one other idea I had, and I know we discussed this during our preparation session, was if you were that paranoid about touching fresh fruit and veg, whether to opt for the frozen. So what I've got, for example, now is, you know, packets of frozen berries. Yeah. The idea being is that that's not being exposed to people's coughs and sneezes. What are your thoughts on frozen fruit and veg, and whether they would count as your 5 a day, or whether they're better for you, worse for you?
Frozen fruit and veg definitely count towards your 5 a day. They're really good replacements. In terms of like the nutrient comparison, they're pretty much on par, and it's actually expected that frozen fruit and veg may even contain higher levels of certain nutrients, like vitamins and minerals, and that's because they're frozen immediately after they're picked. So there's less nutrient losses, you know, as they are picked and packaged and handled and sat in the shop. So, you know, vitamin C content is expected to be higher. They still have the same fiber content as what's in your fresh berries, and same calorie content. So they are handy. They're often cheaper as well. And yeah, they're just as good, I think.
So, okay, so if you're paranoid about decontaminating fresh berries, frozen is perfectly good.
Don't wash your berries with washing up liquid.
Okay. Just picking up on a vegetable question, actually, is it true that microwaving any vegetables takes away the majority of nutrients?
So the issue with vegetables, whether it's fresh or frozen, is that a lot of vitamins are very, very unstable, particularly vitamin C. You can destroy a lot of vitamin C by chopping your carrot. So the best way to cook vegetables is always to steam them, and to not steam them past, you know, being green and being crunchy. My mum used to like boil things until the water was green and they looked dead, and you know, probably very little nutrition left in those. So I would always say steam them until they're quite still crunchy, still bright green. And if you are trying to kind of maximize the potential, you can always use the water that is in what you've boiled or steamed with and use that for stock or for cooking other things in, just to maximize, because things like the vitamin B that's in the vegetables will leach into the water.
Okay. Sorry, still on the subject of vegetables, they're coming in thick and fast now. So the next question I have is there a benefit to eating vegetables raw? There's obviously been a lot of hype over a raw diet, but is it actually beneficial, or is it hype?
So as I said, the vitamins and minerals that are in vegetables are relatively unstable. So when you are eating veg that's raw, you're probably getting a little bit more of those nutrients, because when you cook them or when you process them in any kind of way, you tend to destroy a lot of the vitamins. So I would say, eating raw peppers instead of cooked peppers is better in terms of the vitamin C content. But the fiber doesn't change and the calories don't change. So it is down to preference.
Whilst we're on the subject of raw, this isn't so much raw, it's about hot and cold. Someone once told me ages ago that it's easier for your body to burn off fat from a cold meal than a hot meal. Is that complete nonsense?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. That's another myth busted in our Q&A session. Okay, before we move on to our next topic, I had a question about sweetness. Okay, so the question here is: lots of low-fat foods and drinks are sweetened with saccharin or aspartame, okay, which, as we know, receives a lot of bad press. Are these still preferable to sugar, or should they also be avoided if trying to lose weight?
So I'm glad there was context put on that. So it's, weight loss. In order to lose weight, you do have to be consuming less calories than you typically eat, and that your body will require to maintain, the weight you're at. So if cutting down calories if you're always drinking Coke and you change to Diet Coke, which contains a lot of aspartame, you are cutting a significant amount of calories, and that will help you lose weight. And I know that those kind of sweeteners do get a lot of bad press, but that bad press is based on studies that are done based on, consuming 16 cans of Coke in a day, and I don't know anyone who does that. So take those kind of things with a pinch of salt. And in terms of weight loss, using sweeteners is probably preferable over sugar, just because they contain less calories, and you still get your sweet fix.
Great, thank you. Let's move on to, so we've spoken about snacking. Now, let's talk about the great lunch debate, because everyone is working from home, and I know that I'm getting a little bit bored by eating bagels for lunch every day. And the other thing that I've done is, because I work through my lunch, which is a habit I've always had, but that's fine, because previously I wasn't working from home every day. So on the days I went into London, I would go and grab a pret or some sushi. What ideas do you have for sort of healthy lunches that you can sort of knock up in 5 minutes that doesn't require lots of washing up?
I've been known to eat out of the pan I cook in sometimes to limit that. So usually most people wouldn't have a lot of veg in their lunch, I think, because who likes to take soggy vegetables to the office? So I think if you can take advantage of, cooking fresh when you're working at home, it's a really good idea. So stir fries with like chicken and different vegetables are really quick and quite light. And then with the hot weather recently, my preference has been to have like a big salad bowl with lentils and hummus and maybe salmon or chicken, depending on the day. Bagels are still great, and they're filling and they're quick. I do know that some of my clients have actually found it easier to stay on track by just having meals prepped. So at lunchtime, they don't like the idea of having to think of what to have for lunch or to cook. So I would always advise, whatever you had for dinner, maybe make an extra portion at the time, pop it in a box and leave it in the fridge. So then when lunchtime comes around, you just have to take it out and throw it into the microwave. So that would save time. So things like curries, chicken and rice save really well. If you've been lucky to have maybe a barbecue quite recently, saving a burger and adding it to, some pasta or something at lunchtime is a good idea as well.
Yeah. No, I think the point about having leftovers from the night before has been my saving grace, because even though I've got more time to prepare food, I just can't face the responsibility of preparing something, because never in my life, as an adult, have I had to prepare 3 meals a day, 7 days in a row. That's like 21 meals a week.
So used to eating the convenience food when we're out in the office or bringing something with us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's weird because I've always loved cooking and see myself as someone who's always full of ideas what to cook. But I'm finding that the fatigue has really kicked in. I'm getting bored of the stuff we normally eat. And I think the only reason I can think of is I've never had to prepare 21 meals. I'm granted I'm not doing that myself because my husband's helping, but it is a lot of meals per week when we're so used to having things given to us.
Yeah. And it's a lot to think about as well when it's the middle of your day and you're still trying to stay in the work mode.
Yeah, agreed.
In terms of health, I would say just aim for a good portion of protein, a complex carbohydrate, lots of veggies, and a healthy source of fat like some hummus or olive oil based dressing or something.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Right, I've got a couple of questions. Okay, let's do this one first, and then we'll come back to the one about juicing. So this one is, at the moment, I've also been working through lunch. Yep, so I'm not the only one here. And like me, I'm having toast and nut butter. So again, my go-to lunch will be toast with peanut butter. I have seen powdered nut butters available, which are supposedly better for you. Are they actually better?
So the powdered peanut butter is basically peanut flour, and the idea is that all the fat has been extracted and you make it up with water instead of having the fat. It doesn't taste as great, I will tell people. I've tried and tested it. But if you are on a diet, and quite a strict one, that doesn't allow you to have peanut butter in small portions, it is a good replacement. But again, check the label. Is it higher in sugar than normal peanut butter? So as I said earlier about fat being the most calorie dense nutrient, obviously taking away the fat is going to take away a lot of the calories. So if you are trying to lose weight, it might be a good substitute if you wanted, something different on your toast. But I would say, nut butters, especially the natural ones you can buy now, which are 100% nuts, they're an excellent source of omega-3, the unsaturated fats we were talking about, and fiber and protein. So although they are calorific, I would always say, limit the portion to maybe 20 grams at a time. And yeah, they are something that you need to portion control, but I wouldn't say one is better than the other. It'll be down to preference and kind of the context of what you want.
Okay, great. Thank you. Elle, let's move on to another question. So this one is to do with juicing fresh fruit. So the question is, what are your thoughts on juicing fresh fruit and veg to reduce weight, perhaps replacing breakfast cereal with a juice?
I think it's really stupid, to be perfectly honest. What you'll fill a glass with in terms of juice might be, 2 apples, 3 oranges, a leek, a kale leaf, I don't know, whatever goes into it. But actually it's probably more filling to eat those foods than to drink it. And when you juice it, you take away all the fiber and all the things that are going to keep you full. And it's the difference between, drinking a juice and eating fruit whole is when you eat an apple, you have the fiber, which whilst an apple does contain quite a bit of sugar, it's released a lot more slowly into your bloodstream because you have to digest through that fiber. Whereas when you drink a juice, it goes into the bloodstream like that, spikes your energy levels, might give you energy instantly, but that will crash pretty soon after because there isn't the fiber there to slow down its absorption.
What about making smoothies and adding things like oats to them?
So I would say smoothies are usually a better option to juicing because they do retain a little bit more of the nutrients and the fiber, and they are a little bit more filling. But again, you know, if you're going to put oats into your smoothie, would you be a bit more full if you had a bowl of porridge? You know, it's kind of weighing that up. If you're someone who struggles to eat enough, a smoothie is a great way to get your calories in. But if you're someone that's trying to lose weight, you probably want to maximize what you get to physically eat. So having the oats over, you know, adding them to the smoothie might be a better option.
Now, whilst we're on the subject of smoothies, we have another question here, and also something I'm deeply interested in, because I'm not a huge fan of the taste of milk, so regular cow's milk. And when I make smoothies, I do go for coconut milk to add the liquid element to it. And I have made some very lovely tasting smoothies. Thank you very much. So the question here is coconut milk a healthy source of fat? And what are the benefits of coconut milk over the regular stuff if you're not a vegetarian or trying to be vegan or vegetarian?
So when you say coconut milk, do you mean the coconut milk drinks that come in the cartons, like the Alpro or the almond milk, or do you mean the coconut milk in a can?
I'm talking the ones you put in the fridge, the ones like Alpro Innocent. Yeah.
So they are relatively low calories. A lot of plant-based milks are water, and they're a lot less calories than dairy milk, and they are fortified. If you buy the organic ones aren't, but if you buy things like the Alpro, they're usually fortified with vitamin D and calcium, just like regular milk would contain. But they obviously don't have the protein that regular milk has. Adding it to a smoothie is a great way to blend it, and it adds a really nice flavour. And even coconut milk and porridge adds a nice flavour. I personally don't drink milk either. I use the alternatives, and they are lower in calories, and they're better in that respect. But again, it's down to your personal preference.
Okay. And what about the stuff in cans? Because I will use that in curries.
So the ones in cans are just more concentrated, and so they are more calorific. So the ones in the cartons, like I said, are usually water based, so they contain a lot less calories, whereas the ones in the cans are higher in fat, and they do contain some of the coconut meat. So yeah, they're higher in fat and higher in calories, but again, they're really nice and creamy.
Okay. And any more tips on lunches before we move on to our next meal of the day?
No, I think, you know, don't be hard on yourself. I think people can be very hard on themselves when it comes to, you know, eating healthily and what's considered healthy. But if it ends up being a mix and match of weird foods, as long as it fills you and, you know, it's got some protein and some carbohydrates in it, you're doing fine.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that sometimes we're under this impression, because it is lunch, it has to almost comprise of 3 different components, rather than, you know, for me, I feel guilty when I'm eating toast with peanut butter, because that's almost like a breakfast meal. But I suppose it doesn't matter, does it, whether that you have that for breakfast or for lunch. The point is, as you say, it's keeping you full, and you supplement that with maybe some fruit, something else that will give you the other sort of nutrients that you need. Okay, let's talk about dinner. Now, I used to sort of, like, for me, bulk cooking is the way forward. Okay. Yeah. If you are eating, say, toast and peanut butter for lunch, and then you've eaten sort of dried fruit, can you sort of compensate for the lack of variety during your lunch with your evening meal? And what advice do you have about making sure your evening meals are actually helping you sustain a healthy lifestyle?
So for dinners, just like lunches, you know, making sure you have a source of a lean protein, so fish, chicken, you know, lentils are a good one, and that your carbohydrates are, you know, complex, and they're the whole grain sources, and you know, having a fat source if you haven't eaten much fat throughout the day. It really doesn't matter about kind of the timing of your meals, as long as by the end of the day you have, you know, got enough calories in, got enough protein in, and got enough of variety and nutrients in.
With regard to dinners, 2 questions. One that's actually come in, and I think this is going to be applicable to lots of people who commute into London, or for busy professionals who work long hours, which is the time at which people get home from work. Okay, it can be sort of very late. By that I mean it could be 10 o'clock at night or even later. Okay, when it's too late to eat, because I have this rule that if I don't eat by 7:30, then I've missed my sort of window, and I get really sort of agitated.
Yeah.
But obviously not possible if you haven't even got home by that point.
Yeah. Growing up, my parents both always worked full time, and I swear to God, dinners weren't served until like 9:30 most evenings. And I personally don't like eating that late anymore. I do not like going to bed with a really full tummy, but some people do. And it is definitely, like I said, as long as you consume, sufficient amount of calories and nutrients throughout the day, it doesn't matter whether you save all of those calories and those nutrients until a big final meal before bed, if you like going to bed on a full tummy, or if you'd rather have it in the morning and not eat throughout the night. As long as you have that energy and you're not starving yourself, there's no right or wrong answer. It's definitely down to preference. For optimal digestion, I would say maybe don't go to bed straight after you've eaten. Try and stand or move around for about a half an hour before you lie down. But it is totally down to personal preference. And I know there's a lot of myths that kind of circulate the media that you shouldn't eat too late, and if you eat past 8 o'clock, certain things turn to fat. And but yeah, it's definitely just down to preference.
So this really is a myth then, because you've answered my other question related to all of this, which is, you hear this phrase, don't you? So that your biggest meal should be breakfast, and you should try to not have a really heavy meal in the evenings or even at lunchtimes, because it can make you feel fatigued. And then if you have a heavy meal in the evenings, as you say, you go to bed on an empty stomach, but on a full stomach even. So it sounds to me that it's more about sort of making sure that you've eaten the sufficient number of calories for your body weight and height, etc.
So
and your gender.
At lunchtime, try not to have a massive meal, because like you said, you can end up feeling a bit lethargic and just not energized after you've had whatever you've chosen for lunch. But if you have that at dinner time, who cares? You're going to be lying in front of the TV for the rest of the evening. So it is just down to what you prefer.
And what about how much time you should spend eating your meal? Because the other bad habit I've fallen into is, because I don't, I feel guilty if I take a long lunch break, which is a separate discussion in its own right, about time management and well-being, is, just because I'm eating things on the go, and it's always like I've got another conference call to participate in and I mustn't eat whilst doing a video call because I'll spill food down me. So I just sort of race a meal down like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
And literally just stuff it down my face. Is there anything wrong with that? Should you be sort of pacing yourself when eating?
So there are a lot of recommendations through studies that have said that your meal should take you about 15 minutes to eat. And that is kind of pressing on the whole emphasis of, you should be mindful when you're eating. You should be aware between every forkful, am I hungry? Am I enjoying this? Is this satisfying me? Am I finished now? Or do I need to keep eating? And wolfing something down, you're kind of, you didn't get a chance to savor it, and maybe you're kind of like, did that satisfy me? Have I forgotten I've eaten it? Those are the kind of things that ends up happening. And then maybe in a half an hour's time, you think, I really didn't get to enjoy that, and you want something else. But at the end of the day, you are getting those nutrients in, and that's exactly usually what you need to do. If well, I'm not going to get time to do this for another 2 hours, it is essential to, get that energy in. So it's kind of needs must in that stage. But where possible, I would say try and save a bit of time. And I know that's not always possible, but try and spend about 15 minutes to have your meal and to savor it and to take a break. Yeah.
Right, so let's just go back to questions. So this one says, there are some diet plans that advocate unlimited consumption of carbs like potatoes, rice and pasta. What's your view on that, as have been as I've seen those plans work well for people with huge weight loss, but I don't understand it.
So as I said, weight loss always comes down to being in a calorie deficit, so consuming less calories than your body requires to maintain your current weight. And whether, you consume loads of carbohydrates and cut down on your protein and your fat, it's not an optimal ratio to eat more carbs at the expense of protein and fats. But as long as it's creating a calorie deficit, then it will work for someone. The same way, a low carb diet will work for someone, or a low fat diet will work for someone. They're all these diets work by the same method. It's not that a certain one it's better. They all have the same principle, which is creating that calorie deficit. So it doesn't matter what way you do it. You can cut down on portion sizes and not have to cut out a food group or cut down on a food group and still lose weight. So it's whatever works for someone. But carbohydrates, your requirements will just vary on, the size you are, the size you want to be, your activity levels, things like that.
So do you think, because our activity levels are slightly lower at the moment, because although we're now allowed to go out for unlimited amounts of exercise, do you think all of us should just be eating fewer calories at the moment?
No, I think I remember reading some statistic during the week that people are actually doing more activity than they realise. And you're probably getting out a little bit more than you realise you are doing. So I wouldn't be too concerned about dramatically cutting down on calories, unless you are trying to lose weight.
Okay. I had a question on carbs, because I love carbs. I love pasta. I love potatoes. What do you think is the worst carb in people's diets? Or can you group them like that? If I had to cut out one carb, because I can't see myself ever cutting out carbs completely, because I just
and you shouldn't. The recommended guidelines is that carbohydrates provide 50% of our calories throughout the day. So half your diet should be carbohydrates. I think it always comes down to context, as most nutrition questions do. If you're talking about the carbs that are probably going to give you energy straight away and then leave you with a horrible crash and not provide you with a lot of nutrients, you'd be talking about sugary foods. But then I can't call them bad, because for the likes of maybe an athlete I work with, they might be really good for them the moments before a race or something like that. So you can't label. I don't like labeling foods as good or bad, but I would say for someone who's working from home and doesn't need a sudden hit of energy, I would say to stick towards the more complex carbohydrates like oats and brown rice and potatoes and things that aren't high in sugar, because they will provide you with a lot more sustainable energy, but also added nutrients and vitamins that sugary foods don't have.
Okay. And another question that we had, talking of sort of bad foods and good foods, if there was one food that we should all stop eating as of today, what would that be?
I would probably say to cut down on processed meat, if not avoid it altogether. So the NHS has confirmed that there is convincing evidence that I think studies have kind of correlated intake of processed meat with the incidence of bowel cancer. So things like chorizo and sausages, I would highly advise cutting down on,
And what about, whilst we're on the subject of sausages, what about red meat?
So red meat, the current advice is to eat less than 500 grams a week, which equates to probably 70 grams a day. And to put that into context, it's about 1 8-ounce steak and a small portion of a Sunday roast, which I think is a lot less than what people probably already consume. But if you are eating red meat quite regularly, I would say try and have 1 or 2 red meat free days, and replace it with kind of a white fish or even an oily fish, and maybe poultry instead. But
So does that mean if you go to a barbecue, that's it, one burger and you're done? So no sausages?
If you haven't eaten red meat throughout the week, then no, you can have 1 or 2 servings.
Okay, so you need to save yourself then for that barbecue if you've got one coming.
But unfortunately, yeah, save yourself for that steak on a Saturday night.
Okay. Now, there was one other question that came in, which was to do with sports. So if you, the person is running, if allowed due to sort of social distancing measures, the plan is to swim the English Channel.
Oh, amazing.
What foods would you recommend for that in terms of carbs and training leading up to that?
So no specific food, but I would say to definitely make sure you increase your calories a little bit more for any increase in activity. Because the last thing you want when you're training for any kind of endurance event is to be losing weight, so to be in a calorie deficit. And you do need to be aware that you're training, you will be burning more calories and you will need to compensate for that. Because if you don't, things like muscle loss will occur just as much as weight loss will occur, and that's, you want to maximize the amount of muscle you have. So I would say to step up protein a little bit. So current recommendations would be about 1.8 grams per kilo to 2 grams per kilo for someone who is active and training for something. So if you are 60 kilos, aim for 120 grams of protein. Carbohydrates, definitely step them up a little bit, base them around training times. Was there any other kind of specific question with that, or was it?
No, it was just a very general question. And then whilst we're talking on the subject of protein, again, just for our vegetarian sort of participants, I've generally tried to cut down on meat anyway. But the reason I struggle with it is that although I quite like things like lentils, I just cannot do tofu and corn-based products. What other sort of foods should we be eating if we're trying to cut down on meat but not reduce our recommended protein intake?
So I think that out of all nutrients, protein is the least likely one that anyone in the UK would be deficient in, because it's in everything we eat, but the quality is really important. And there is a major difference between plant-based and animal-based protein. To try and explain it as simply as I can, animal proteins like eggs, dairy, and meat contain all the essential amino acids in a serving. Whereas plant-based proteins like lentils or tofu, quinoa, they aren't all complete sources of proteins, which means that in order to avail of all the 9 essential amino acids that our body needs, you would have to combine different sources. So an example is like beans on toast. So bread is quite high in bread is high in lysine, and beans lack lysine, but bread lacks methionine and beans are high in methionine. So by combining the two, you get that missing amino acid. Whereas with meat, you just need to eat a portion and you'll get all your nine essential ones. So the key is that if you are cutting out meat and you are starting to eat more plant-based sources of protein, you need to make sure you're having a variety of them in order to get all of the essential amino acids. You said not a fan of tofu, and I know a lot of people aren't. I think it's an acquired taste. And a lot of people tend to jump onto corn products or the other alternatives that are available, but actually they're probably not the best. I would always say to choose a whole food source of protein like beans, quinoa, legumes and lentils and things like that first, because these
that's good. Okay.
These alternatives are often marketed as being healthy, but actually they're usually more processed than meat. So a fake chicken breast, a vegan chicken breast, what the hell is in that in comparison to a normal chicken breast? So you need to watch out for those because they are highly processed and full of fillers and preservatives and often higher in salt. So if you are looking to cut down on meat, I would say, you know, just maybe increase dairy, eggs. If you're cutting down on red meat, try and replace it with chicken or fish, because they're all complete sources of protein. And I would just say, if you are looking at the alternative meat section, you know, just actually look at the salt content and the fat content as well, because they all have usually added emulsifiers and things like that.
Great. Well, do you know what? It's exactly 2:00. So
Oh.
unless anyone has any sort of burning question that we've missed, then I think I'm going to be really disciplined and I'm going to end the session. So did you want to make any closing remarks, Elle, before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, I think just don't be beating yourself up about, you know, how you're eating during lockdown. It's been a weird time for everyone, and just go back to basics when it comes to nutrition. So increase your vegetables and cut down on processed food. Don't be, you know, trying to add a load of superfoods to your diet.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think from my sort of personal experiences, planning ahead so that you don't have that sort of, you know, 6:30 p.m. what are we having for dinner conversation, which invariably ends up in a row. And then the other one about sort of bulk cooking and keeping leftovers for either later on in the week or for lunch. Yeah.
That cuts down on food waste. And, you know, when you have a meal plan, you also have a shopping list. So that kind of can help with budgeting and things like that. So there are a lot of advantages to it.
Brilliant. Okay, then. Well, look, I think we will wrap up on that point. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. If you've enjoyed the session, do send us feedback, or if you've got any tips on how we can improve it. And I'm going to post about this on LinkedIn. So please put some glowing feedback on LinkedIn so we can spread the word about Cheeky Little Careers. Stay well, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Husnara.